Hey everybody, and welcome to our webinar on the introduction to Tussell Supplier Groups. I'm really pleased to kind of announce that this morning at 9 o'clock, we launched our brand new feature, Tussell Supplier Groups. It's been a long project to get this data into here, but it's a real game changer, and I'm really excited to show you what's in the presentation. So let's jump right into it. I'll just run you through an agenda. So we've got 4 agenda points today. The first is essentially what are Tussell Supplier Groups, explaining what the feature is, why we've done it, and why you can use it. The next is to run through what new features we have, what pieces of functionality can you use in our platform that enable you to actually take advantage of this feature. And then third, which is where the meat of the session will be, is how Tussell Supplier Groups will move the needle for you. We only develop things that we think will really help you, and really we want to show you how this is going to be a game changer. And then finally, a closing question and answer session. Just to kind of set some house rules around questions, feel free to ping them in the chat throughout the webinar as they come to you. It's always good so you don't forget them at the end. However, we will just kind of round up all of the questions at the end, and my colleague James, who's also sat on the call, he will almost act as a moderator with the questions, and at the end we can just fire through them all. So yeah, bit of patience with the questions, but we will definitely get to them. And then finally, a kind of question that we're always commonly asked with webinars. Yes, a recording will be sent out afterwards. So let's get started. The first question, quite simply, what are Tussell Supplier Groups? Tussell Supplier Groups consolidate related supplier entities into groups, providing a real picture of a supplier's footprint. So, what constitutes related? Using our expertise built up over time, we're grouping suppliers that, through kind of common understanding amongst professional community, public procurement community, they're adjudged to have a relationship and be related. To make this clear, this is a Tussell data point, while staying purposely away from a kind of strict legal structure, which help if you're in banking or acquisitions, but don't necessarily align with the use cases for Tussell and building effective procurement strategies in the public sector. Some examples of why we're staying away from this legal structure: there are companies that are kind of partner-owned models that will have partnership structures in the US, partnership structures in the UK, partnership structures in the EU, but we all kind of know them to be the same company. Flip side of this, another example is companies that are owned by banks. We're actually interested in who the suppliers are themselves, rather than just necessarily where the money's going to in terms of kind of corporate ownership. The final thing to just add to this is a data point. We'll be continuing to refresh this data and look at the supplier groups and the associations en masse at least every 6 months. And we'll be doing even more regular spot checks on a weekly basis for notable additions to the Tussell Supplier Groups. So, what does this mean? As you can see from the graphic here, by adding a new Tussell Supplier Group data point, we're giving our users the extra flexibility to see where public sector contracts and spending are going to. Either at a single entity level, this is obviously a kind of false entity, it's Computer Inc., Mouse Inc., Keyboard Inc., but they all form part of Tech Corp. And what we want to do is give you the opportunity to see it both at a group level or at an individual level. I thought what I'd do is I'd introduce a kind of real-life example. So using Capita, one of the largest supplier groups and one of the most kind of prominent companies in the public sector, we can see how impactful this new data point really is. Taking the largest entity of Capita in Tussell, Capita Business Services, as a single supplier, we have over 540 awards, £5.8 billion worth of revenue invoiced, and 516 customers using our spend data set. However, viewing it as part of the wider Capita group, you can see that even the largest entity will not give you an entire picture of Capita's footprint. So Capita Business Services is just one of 76 suppliers that form Capita Group. Capita Group has 1,800 awards, which is a kind of over 200% increase on what you'd see if you just looked at Capita. Nearly £9 billion invoiced, which is an extra 50% on what Capita Business Services has invoiced, and 703 customers. So nearly an extra 200 customers added to what you'd see if you're purely looking at Capita Business Services. So why have we done this? Fundamentally, we've spent long enough handling public sector data to know that you just need to use enhanced data to truly understand who is selling in the public sector. The data that is published about who a supplier is fragmented without matching and groups. it boils down to essentially asking the wrong data set for your insights. So here's a practical example. The question, many people will ask this question: does the local government cloud services market have a dominant supplier? As a seller to the government, you may be using this as a way to kind of test whether you want to move into the market. As a government body itself, you may be looking to procure some cloud services, and you may want to understand which supplier to work with. So what I've done here is I've produced a table comparing open data and Tussell data. If we look at the first row, looking at the volume of number of suppliers with at least 10 contracts, so a supplier that essentially has a strong position in this market, using the fragmented open data, you'd recognize that there are just 7. However, if you use Tussell data, in reality, there are actually 19 companies that have got 10 plus contracts. If you're using the open data in this sense, you'd think there's a bit of a vacuum in terms of top dominant suppliers. However, actually, the truth is kind of a bit more it's more concentrated than that. This kind of misrepresentation of the market and how many big suppliers there are continues in row 2. So actually, looking at the kind of market share by the top 10 suppliers, looking at Tussell data, there is nearly a quarter of the market is held by just 10 suppliers. However, the open data is nearly half of this amount, so just 12%. However, despite it being more competitive at the top end of the market for new entrants, actually the average number of contracts held per company is actually higher. So if you are looking to move into this market, it does show that there is a potential to win more work than the open data suggests. I think finally, the most kind of stark example as to why using open data is just not good enough if you're looking to build a really effective data-driven strategy is based on looking at the top supplier. So if you looked at open data, you would think that Civica at 39 wins is the top supplier in this category. However, using Tussell data, Bytes has won 62 contracts. Now, this is really, really important because depending on what your relationship with Civica or Bytes is, that will massively impact the way that you choose your strategy. You could be acting on, maybe you have terrible relationships with Civica and don't like kind of competing in the same space with them. If you think that they're the top dog in this market, you'll make the call to not actually enter the market when in reality they're not. And that could be a massive, massive game changer in terms of your strategy. And really, it could be kind of catastrophic for the kind of opportunities that you're missing. So I guess my point I'm coming across here is that you can't just rely on open data when you're trying to understand who the key suppliers are in a market. And to kind of step back, look, you've already heard a lot of me talking about why you need the right data to understand who's selling to the public sector. And I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about why this is so important and ties into kind of our purpose as a business, so you speak. Data quality is the driver of everything we do at Tussell and will continue to do so. But why? Well, think about the end game when you're using a service like Tussell. Everybody here wants to understand something about what is happening in procurement. So that something can change depending on what your use case is, depending on what organization you're in, but fundamentally you're here to get an answer about the public sector. The vast majority of you will be here trying to kind of build data-led strategies to enable better interaction between public and private. If you're selling to the government, to sell more. If you're working as part of the government, to get more effective procurement. To do this, as with any strategy, what you're essentially trying to do is search for actionable insights. You need to get a piece of an insight that will make you have the right data behind any decision that you take. And you need to follow the stages. This is true of any strategy. It's true of the strategy I do when I'm doing product development. It's true of any sales strategy, whatever it may be. You need to follow the stages. What do you need to know? What are the questions you need to answer? Then you need to do, what are the data sets that can help me do this? And then fundamentally, can I trust this data to be correct? Without this stage, you'll never be able to have actionable insights that really, really tell you the truth about the market. And it's for that reason we put data integrity above kind of everything we do at Tussell in terms of features. Without high quality data, you're not going to be able to kind of get the insights you need fundamentally. And just to kind of explain this and kind of see how this works more widely into what we do at Tussell. So for example, Tussell's data has 20% more expiry dates than open data. Other things we do, Tussell verifies the framework routes used by 25% of all contract awards. And also, Tussell eradicates double counting by deduping over 40,000 contracts a year. All in all, I think the message I'm trying to get across is that data quality is really, really important, and Tussell we put that really high up our list. Enough of the why. Let's get on with showing you some exciting new features in action. Just a reminder, as of this morning, the feature is now live, so anybody who's got a login, you can actually come play about with it in the background. I'm going to run you through 4 new pieces of functionality where you can take advantage of the Tussell Supplier Group feature in our platform before moving on to how the new feature is actually a game changer for building your strategy and looking more at specific use cases. The first piece of functionality is simply a new data point found in our downloads that include information on suppliers. We're a data company with a focus on giving you the cleanest granular data on the market, so important to us that our users can find this data point in our downloads. To show you, in this instance, I'm downloading recent Cabinet Office contract awards. Once the report generates, it's quite simple. I open up this in Excel with our macro file running across the top and formatting it. And here you can see the new data point. So if there is a supplier group name, you'll find it in all of our downloads. It's as simple as that. The next piece of functionality is an update to our supplier filter. The whole idea with this is to enable you to pick and choose groups and their entities and easily select which entities or groups you want to view. So here, if you click by supplier and search by name, this can be found on the frameworks, contract awards, and spend data tabs and supplier tabs. So what makes this so powerful? So type in the name of the company that you're after. In this case, Simeon. The results show me multiple options. You can choose the group identified by the G icon. You can choose or you can see the suppliers that form this group as identified by the group name in bold. So once you select one of these entities that are part of the group, the selection now shows your choice unfolded out from the group name. See, we've got Simeon Skill, part of Simeon Risk Management as identified by the G. You can fold this away to make it neat and tidy. Or this is the really powerful part. When you've partially selected a group as identified by the minus sign, you can select this, and what it will do is it will automatically add all the remaining members of that group to the filter in one click. So let's try another. Let's try Agito. We can see that Agito is part of the Capita supplier group because of the name in bold. By selecting this entity, it shows that Capita is partially selected. And again, we can click the button and it will add all members of the Capita group. Here we can pick and choose the entities that we want. Finally, just as ever, you can also just select entities that do not form part of wider groups, like Tussell. Not every company is part of a group. So here, we've ended the filter with one single supplier, a fully selected group, and a partially selected group. And we have the results here. And we'll go to the supplier ranking, where you can see the individual entities that form our selection. And just to explain, you'll find this across different tabs, and you can use a shortcut to get there. So our Tussell shortcuts, click Spend Data, and this will carry across your supplier filter to the Spend Data tab, which you can see here. The next new piece of functionality is really, really cool, and I think it's probably the most powerful piece of functionality in our front end. I'm really pleased with this piece of work. What this is our new supplier group ranking view. And this allows you to compare and contrast groups and supplier level earnings across the platform. Here, I'm looking at National Highways and the Department for Transport. In our Spend Data tab, I'm starting with the trend over time view, so we can just see how much together they spend over time. But to better understand the accounts, I'm moving to the supplier ranking view to see the key service providers. Here, now you'll find a new secondary sub-tab called Supplier Groups. This enables you to toggle between looking at the results purely at a single supplier level, as we do on the suppliers view. You can see here, Govia, Thameslink, etc., Kier Highways, or actually at the much more valuable group level. When you click the view, you'll return the sums for the sum values for Tussell Supplier Groups as identified by the drop-down arrow, or loan entities that are not part of the groups. Here's the really neat piece of functionality. If you identify a group, you can also drill into the supplier groups to compare the entities that are earning the group its revenue. Here, clicking on first group, we can see both the huge number of suppliers that make up the group's revenue, as well as the total revenue. So this is really important, as the company's revenue can come from a lot of different sources. And just to kind of explain, you'll find this feature on contract awards, frameworks and spend data, everywhere else where there is a supplier ranking view. And now I'm just going to toggle through the tabs to show you that it exists on each tab. Contract awards as well. And just firing through the fourth piece of functionality. The last piece of functionality allows you to make the most of the supplier group data point is the new supplier group profile page. This gives you a singular view of an entire group's public sector footprint. There are two ways you can get to this group. You can click a name on a supplier group ranking page. This will take you through to their profile. Here we can see first group. This includes a table showing how many suppliers form the group, in this instance 37, and all of the suppliers that form this group. We've then included headline statistics, which give you a summary of the total footprint of the supplier group thanks to its constituent parts. These statistics are clickable and will take you to the appropriate pages on Tussell with the supplier group selected in the filter. So we've got 172 contracts, first group here. Heading back, we also have total invoices, which will take you through to spend data, total number of frameworks the group is listed on, and then total number of customers as well, which uses the richer spend data to show you kind of the variety of customers they're working with. From this page, you can also dig into the individual suppliers that are part of the groups. This will take you to the familiar profile pages found under the suppliers tab. And these pages actually act as an important kind of second route to the profile pages, where you'll see under the name, you've got first group, and you can click this and it will take you through to the profile again. Where the final piece of functionality is that you can download the suppliers as well. So moving on from pure functionality, I want to explain how you can incorporate this into the way that you use Tussell, basically ways to up your insights, where it's all about getting to that actionable insight that we talked about earlier on. The first use case, and probably the most obvious use case, is that Tussell Supplier Groups enables you to have a real and true kind of understanding of what an accurate kind of supplier landscape is across the public sector. So to start, say I'm using a saved search, which is looking at advertising and PR. I want to see who the key suppliers are in this market to understand a bit more about the sector. I click the supplier ranking view and I can see all the individual suppliers here. So Global Outdoor Media is viewed as the top supplier with £1.1 billion in contracts, albeit through 8 contracts. If we click the supplier groups view, we can see that Global Radio, which owns that group, remains at the top. However, Omnicom has shot up into second place. We open this up and we can see that the revenue is actually coming through multiple different suppliers. So just to pause it on here, the importance of this is that without looking at something at a supplier group view, you may not understand that Omnicom has got such a promising position in that market. Let's just move down. Further, we can click on other entities like M&C Saatchi, Vivendi, who is also earning a lot of revenue through a bunch of different suppliers. So yeah, to reinforce that point, without kind of seeing it at a group level, you're always going to really kind of have a false view as to who the key players are in that market. Alternatively, this is also a real game changer if you're trying to profile an individual buyer, account, customer, however you'd like to kind of phrase it. So here we're looking at network rail infrastructure. We're looking at spending over time. But to really understand the account, you need to understand who is actually invoicing here, who the key players are, which will make a kind of real impact as to whether you want to enter the account, partner in the account, work with this account a bit more. So we'll click supplier ranking. And here, on the loan entity level, we can see that EDF Energy is the top supplier to Network Rail. However, if we click the supplier groups ranking view, we can now actually see that Siemens is the top supplier to this account. This is because when we click into Siemens, we can see that Siemens Mobility and Siemens Rail Automation have both invoiced over £1 billion each. Separately, they would fall way below EDF Energy, but together we can see that Siemens is actually the largest supplier. So without knowing this relationship, your view of an account would be completely different. EDF, of course, remains very high. £2 billion is a lot. But there are other entities where grouped entities together are kind of showing a true picture. So Balfour Beatty, we've got a lot of suppliers. So the message here is that without looking at suppliers that are part of groups and without seeing them together as groups, you're always going to struggle to truly understand who the key players are in the market. And that really, really has the potential to kind of impact your business strategy, whether you're viewing it from a competitive partner or kind of looking to procure their services. So really, really important to see the whole picture. The second really, really valuable use case of Tussell Supplier Groups is that it helps you to expose hidden revenue streams for companies that you may not have known were connected. To start this, what we're going to do is use the supplier filter. We're going to input the name G4S, and what this brings up is all of the entities that form the supplier group G4S. So whilst there are those under the name G4S, which everybody would know if you just typed in the phrase G4S, there are other parts of the group that just you may not know are related because they don't have the same name. So Securicore, TSS, Stratus Integrated Services. Without this, you may be missing where a company is getting its revenue from, and as a result, who its customer base is. Another example, I've done the same for the company Alstrom, who you can see companies like Bombardier are part of the same group. The message here is that just because a company doesn't have the same name as its group, it doesn't necessarily mean it can't be in the same group. This is why Tussell Supplier Groups is so important. And of course, you can pick and choose the entities as you like as you work through here. To show another example of how easy it is to find unknown relationships, I'm taking a strategic supplier saved search that I've got. So in my search, just as it loads, I'll explain what I've got. I've selected a few of the entities, so Kier, Balfour Beatty, Mighty, Amy, Capita, Babcock, etc. A few of the kind of larger facilities-based strategic suppliers. And then I've selected all of the entities that you'll have known just by name. So does the name contain Babcock? Does the name contain Balfour? Ones that would be obvious to the naked eye that it is part of the same group. Using Tussell Supplier Groups, the fact that you can now automatically add every group member to your search, just a click of a button, and updating the results. What this means is you're going to find all of the different companies that form that group that could be adding revenue to them. So I'll just run through here, selecting Capita, selecting Kier, and updating the results. So before we do that, we've got £5.9 billion of spend in 1 year. Update the results. And just by being able to click those names and kind of adding automatically all of the entities to that group, we've nearly gone up by an extra £1 billion of revenue. So without knowing exactly who's in the group, if you just based it on the names, you'd be missing out on approximately 20% of revenue. And then if you click into each individual group, you can see that there are entities here earning them a lot of money. Connect Rose Coventry, who knew that was part of Balfour. You click into Kier, and we also have Tilia Cross earning £4 million in a year. Babcock, this is probably the starkest example, because at Babcock, the entity that invoices the most for them in the public sector is Devonport Royal Dockyard. That doesn't have Babcock in the name. If you didn't know they held this contract, you'd likely miss out on this without Tussell Supplier Groups. So look, it's really important to know who's in your competitors' groups, because fundamentally, you may actually be competing with them indirectly through one of their kind of subsidiaries. And Tussell Supplier Groups really helps you to do that. Finally, if you just click the name of the group, you'll also be able to see every single part of that footprint, as I showed you before with the profile pages. I'm clicking on Capita, and you see the total awards, total invoices, frameworks listed on, and total customers. So you get a full breakdown as to kind of the coverage of Capita's footprint. The next use case is that Tussell Supplier Groups is really excellent at helping you to identify when there's over-reliance on single suppliers in a buyer's or government body's supply chain. If we take London Fire Brigade as a great example in Tussell, it shows that we've got nearly £900 million of spending. Click the supplier ranking, and it shows the breakup. Click the supplier group ranking, and we can see that straight away that actually Babcock International Group is by far the dominant supplier in the account. We can see here £286 million across 2 suppliers, critical services and training, each invoicing over £100 million each. The really kind of stark thing about this is the next kind of largest private sector supplier is Blue 3. Babcock has invoiced nearly 10 times as much to London Fire Brigade. By identifying this, if you're the organisation London Fire Brigade, you need to start eliminating the risk out of your supply chain by being so exposed to one supplier. If you're a competitor, you can try and use this as a way to sell a message to London Fire Brigade that they're overexposed to one individual supplier and need to kind of de-risk their supply chain. And also the really good thing about Tussell Supplier Groups is that you can see, well, whilst there's a risk to London Fire Brigade, we can also see how important a supplier London Fire Brigade is to Babcock International. So we click the name of the group. This will take us through to their supplier profile page. And if we click on one of the headline statistics, so in this instance, total invoices, click buyer ranking, and this will show you that London Fire Brigade, whilst third on Babcock's top customer list, is not so essential as Ministry of Defence is to the account. Ministry of Defence is £5 billion, London Fire Brigade, £286 million. So if they lost London Fire Brigade, I'm sure they'd be pretty disappointed, but it's not going to be the end of the world. In sum, London Fire Brigade are overexposed to Babcock, but Babcock are not overexposed to London Fire Brigade. Instead, they're probably a bit overexposed to the Ministry of Defence. The second part of this specific use case is looking at benchmarking prices. So clicking into another tab, what I've got is I've got Atlas FM as a group selected. Again, I'm using the spend data here and looking at the individual entities we have obviously ones that are obviously part of the group, Atlas FM, Atlas Cleaning, Atlas Contractors, but we also have entities like Sussex Cleaning, Enterprise Support, ones you wouldn't know that are necessarily part of the group. Now, if you're looking to compete with Atlas FM, what you want to be able to do is see who are all the members of that group and who could they be invoicing through. So if we're looking at their pricing on an annual basis, let's just look at this individual year, so 2022. I'll look at local government. And by having this entire group in one view, what we can do is we can see exactly how much Atlas FM invoice per year. So to larger councils like Buckinghamshire Council, they're invoicing about £800,000 a year. But to kind of smaller, I guess, non-county councils, they're invoicing around about £100,000 per year. Wanworth Borough Council looks like an outlier in this instance. So if we were to take the average somewhere around Newark and Sherwood, we're looking at about £97,000 a year. Having this view in one place of the entire group just means that you're able to kind of see how people benchmark, what their prices are in a lot more kind of easy and straightforward way. And then to move on to the kind of fourth and final use case where Tussell Supplier Groups will really transform the way that you approach and build your public sector strategy is by helping you to understand which frameworks the suppliers are using as routes to market. In this, I'm looking at Atos IT services. I'm going to click onto the Atos group. Here, amongst the plethora of kind of key stats and individual entities that we've got, I'm going to focus on the frameworks listed on stats. This is showing that Atos's entities have been listed on frameworks 133 times, including the different lots, because you can be listed multiple times per framework. By clicking on the stat, we're taken to the frameworks tab, where this is showing that it's the 133 kind of listings translate to 102 distinct frameworks. And on this page, if we scroll down, you can see we've got Atos as a group selected and all of the individual entities in the filter. What this provides is a list of all of the frameworks that Atos as a group is listed on, which means all of the routes to market that they can be kind of selling their services to. Or the flip side, I want to buy my services from Atos. Which frameworks can I use to do this to? Having this long list is really important. If you're a government body and you're looking for a kind of easy way to work with Atos, you can identify frameworks that you know in the past you've used, or identify frameworks that are quite easy to use. So G-Cloud, for example, is more of a catalogue direct awarding service than one where you may have to go through mini competitions. Looking at this, you may also find frameworks that you didn't know existed. Big data and analytics. Let's have a look at this framework. Click on the name. We have all the details of the framework here. We have information about the CCS who run the framework and some contact information. You can save the contract for future reference. So do you want to be on this next time it comes around? Let's save it. You can see the other list of suppliers that are listed on here alongside Atos. Are you a competitor? Should you be on this framework? Are you not on this framework? Who are the other people you can buy the services from? Our framework tab allows you to answer all of these questions quite easily. The other approach you can take is to go to the Contract Awards tab, where we'll type in Atos as a supplier. This is going to show up all of the contracts that Atos have won. We're going to select only those that have been bought through frameworks, so yes. 147, but £2.8 billion through frameworks. And click the framework ranking, and we can see the frameworks that are earning the most of their revenue. So interestingly, their top frameworks are the DWP's Personal Independent Payment Service, PIP. By volume, however, we can see that they're winning a lot of their work through the more traditional routes of G-Cloud. If you're a supplier, if you're a competitor, the question would be looking at this: why are you not on G-Cloud? How can I get on the next iteration of G-Cloud? If you're looking to purchase their services, straight away you can say, okay, I know G-Cloud in particular enables us to direct award. Let's definitely use G-Cloud. So that is the last of the webinar content. This is the last of the kind of 4 key use cases for why Tussell Supplier Groups is a game changer. I hope these videos have been useful. The next slide is essentially to look at the questions that have been asked. Cool. So the first question that we have, are there other differences between open data and Tussell data apart from the grouping? Yes, definitely. So just to bring you back to the initial slide that we talked about, kind of the differences between open data and Tussell data. The grouping is, of course, very, very important. But if we just look at those three examples on the right-hand side, Tussell's data has 20% more expiry dates than open data. That is one example. What does that mean? If you're a government body, what that means is it's more chances to find opportunities for joint procurement. If you're trying to sell to the government, that's really good. It's 20% more contracts for your pipeline. So that's one example. Open data doesn't provide any information about frameworks, the routes to market. Tussell actually verifies the framework routes to market for 25% of all contract awards. That's a very, very important piece of kind of data. And then another one is kind of eradicating double counting. Contracts are published in multiple locations. Some have to be published on Contract Finder, PCS, FTS. This has led to a lot of essentially duplicate publications. If you're using open data and you had a contract that's worth £1 million, but it's published twice, you're going to think it's a £2 million contract available, and there's 2 contracts for you. Without having somebody deduping that data for you, you're double counting, and we dedupe about 40,000 contracts per year, so it's a big volume. There's a lot of open data that really needs to be kind of cleaning up the names, associating the groups together, matching, all of that sort of stuff. And in particular, one of the real challenges and one of the things that we really strive to kind of achieve is the connection across the different data sets. Open data is very, very kind of segmented: tenders, contract awards, and then invoices. What we're doing is we're kind of enabling you to see the whole market by looking at kind of frameworks, contract awards, spend data all in one place. The next question: how do you define open data? The definition of open data is essentially the data that is published by the government. Simple as. So in the procurement sense, that means contracts. So we have, a great example is contracts that are required to be published on Contracts Finder, Finder Tender Service, Public Contract Scotland, Sell to Wales, and then also spend data, which is published independently by each public sector body. And their regulations there basically cover England, not Wales or Scotland. How do we treat joint ventures? We're keeping joint ventures separate from groups. This is because it would be unfair. I'm just plucking one out of the air. I don't know if this actually exists. If there was a joint venture between Mott MacDonald and WSP, it would be unfair for one of us to say, okay, all of this revenue is going to Mott MacDonald or it's going to WSP, so we're keeping them separate. So is G4S consolidated into Allied Universal? No. The answer to this is we are treating G4S as G4S. As I mentioned before, this is based on, we're trying to stay away from the kind of strict legal structures and ownership. What we're focusing on is kind of how people view these individual companies. And in particular, G4S is a great example. It is G4S that is the strategic supplier to the government, not Allied Universal. And because we're all about kind of understanding the public sector marketplace, the reason is that's why we've kind of chosen G4S, because it's how the public sector views it. Have you got data on call-off contract awards and revenue, or just framework appointments? Yes, I'm very pleased to say that we do have call-off awards in Tussell. Our framework module, our call-off module is excellent. I'm going to kind of just put it out there. So we know that just knowing who's on a framework isn't enough. In particular, we know that the values frameworks are given are almost useless in a way. They're kind of indicative as to what may go through it. But in reality, you need to be able to actually answer the questions. If I bring it all back to kind of data you can trust, you need to know the call-offs that go through certain frameworks. What time period does the billing data cover? The invoicing data, we started to collect this and we go back to 2016 on the invoicing data. And it goes up to the present day, and we're continuing to add to this database. This is a really, really powerful database, and it's kind of grown in size massively, 150 million rows now. There is a lag in the way that the government published this. So I talked about kind of open data versus enhanced data. Contracts data is reasonably well regulated. You have the Cabinet Office taking control of kind of who publishes the data and the quality in which they're publishing. Spend data is less well regulated. So whilst the guidance suggests that you're supposed to publish once a month, in reality, the average is people are about 6 months behind. But yeah, the data is as live as it gets, and we update this on a weekly basis. We have teams kind of matching all of the different formats that they produce into one kind of readable format for you. How do you make sure supplier groups are correct and updated? As I mentioned earlier, this is a kind of this is a kind of strictly kind of Tussell data point. However, what we're doing all the time to ensure these are up to date is we're regularly checking kind of corporate ownerships, we're checking, and we're also checking kind of acquisitions, things like that. But essentially, we have a whole data team who do a lot of our data validation for us. So that is the simplest answer. There's hard work behind all of this stuff. There's a kind of foundation based around kind of companies, but all in all, it's keeping your ear to the ground. It's listening to kind of acquisitions in the market, and it's also being very kind of reactive to kind of changes as well. Tussell verifies the framework routes used to buy 25%. Is this statement saying that only 25% are via frameworks? Not necessarily. So what we're saying is that of the contract awards that are published, so about 100,000 a year, we're able to verify the route to market via frameworks for a quarter of all of them. And I think this ties into one of the next questions. How will you get near to 100%? The simple answer is 100% of contracts aren't bought through frameworks. There are a lot of contracts that are bought through traditional kind of tender and pin routes. And what we're saying is that about a quarter of the contracts that the public sector publish are bought through frameworks, and we're there to verify them for you. Can you please explain how you define a public sector framework? Yeah, and we can definitely do that. So a framework, we generally define it based on whether or not the government defines it as a framework. So for those who are a bit less kind of clued up on frameworks, a framework is essentially a preferred supplier list. They're becoming more and more prevalent in the public sector as a way to purchase services. So what happens is that, let's just take this merchant acquiring services framework. What happens is an organization, so the Crown Commercial Service, will say, right, there is a need in the public sector for merchant acquiring services. We're going to build a framework. And what that means is that we can essentially pre-vet the suppliers who can provide this service. The suppliers who are on here, so Barclays, GP UK, Stripe Payments, and WorldPay, are essentially pre-vetted. They've got the services, they know what their offerings are. And what that means is, to a public sector entity, almost half the procurement is already done. Well, not half, but kind of part of the procurement is already done for them. So what we do is, the government don't really make a distinction when they publish the data as to whether it's a framework or a contract award. And we have a team that identify frameworks through the published data and then separate them out and then add them to it. So look, that's it. I think we've hit 10 o'clock, just looking at my watch, bang on 10 o'clock, a little bit longer than expected, but there were some really good questions in there. And I just really want to say thank you all for joining. For anybody who is a Tussell user, please go and have a play with it. I really want you to, and kind of give me your feedback. I'll be reaching out to people as well for feedback over the next kind of 6-week period. And then for others who haven't seen Tussell before, please book in a demo and one of our kind of team will help you. So thank you all for joining. I hope that was informative. Ran through a lot of data in there and a lot of features, but we're really pleased with this. And thank you all for your questions. They were really good, and it's always a pleasure to answer questions you have about Tussell and the public sector. So look, if you've got any extra questions, please feel free to contact us. You can use contact@tussell.com, and we'll pick up those questions as soon as they come in.